It shall forevermore endure, the saints and angels. night, David Ledford pointed out the same thing that I'm doing this morning. I was impressed with his presentation and appreciated how he had said at one point, it just seems like the very title of the book of Genesis should have a James Earl Jones or somebody to utter that word. The significance of this book is almost unimaginable. And the power that's revealed within it just seems to me for quite a long time now that it just demands a thunderclap when that word is uttered. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them. Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the face of the expanse of the heavens. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that creeps on the earth. Behold, I have given to you every plant yielding seed on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has the fruit of the tree yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that creeps on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. From any tree of the garden you may surely eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from it, for in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. And thus, brethren, begins Genesis. I can hear that thunderclap. I try to imagine in the vastness of eternity and in the perfection, in the infinite perfection of our God, when suddenly He spoke and everything we know came into existence over the course of some 6 days. And then He rested. Not just on that seventh day, but the 8th, the 9th, and all that have followed to this day. For creation, by His word, is perfect. It is finished. It does not need fixing, creating again. It is as it should be and has been under our dominion. What it is now is because of us, because of those who were made in the image of God and how they handled the dominion that God gave to humankind. Kind of a jarring segue. But logistics, brethren, are worth the time. Preparation and planning, getting set up, and now for a class like this one, is, I think, extremely important. Our younger son now lives in Fort Worth, Texas area. There's an F-35, a fighter, a 35 assembly line there. It looks like this. If you have a very involved, very valuable, and what will be very useful product, something that you want to make, it takes time to get set up for it. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time this morning, more than I'd like to, but nonetheless, I think it'll help you to understand that first slide we had and what to expect as the class progresses. So we're going to have 12 and now a half weeks together. The reason I put this up is for me. What I was hoping is that if possible, and I recognize that it isn't necessarily possible, if you could sit first, didn't know how many people were coming in this bank right here, and secondly, if you could fill up this one, but if you could find it in your heart, when we have this class to come into these center sections, I myself would appreciate it just immensely. How many of you remember Mr. Goo from 1960 to 62 on television? 1997, and Leslie Nielsen made a movie out of him. What is he most famous for those of you who are too young to remember? He's famous for being about as blind as I am. 2019, I went through 2 surgeries, had a major problem with my left eye. I had actually what was described as a stroke in my left eye. The artery was blocked, its branches died, and so I lost a significant portion forever of the usefulness of my left eye. My right eye was already so bad that I was legally blind, although it's correctable to 20/20. I'm that guy. Now I can drive, don't worry about it, you'll get out of the parking lot safely. I have perfect vision when it comes to driving. But brethren, I can't see you. I can't see the expressions on your face. I can't get the feedback, and I really need it. If you have a comment to make, if you're looking to be recognized and to offer something in the class, even if you raise your hand, it can escape me on the periphery. I really need you to be here for my sake if you can, though I perfectly understand it. And then be aware that if you fall asleep, I have sometimes thrown things at people. So I like to have you within range. But worse than that, brethren, I mean worse than that, hearing aids are in this morning as they usually are. But the ravages of time have worked quite a number on my ears as well. I can't hear you. So when you raise your hand, and I say, all right, what's on your mind? You all should be aware, I think, it's generally good for an entire congregation. Don and I have been here for 15 months. I sit usually somewhere up here in the frontish, as I've asked you to do, so that I can see and so that I can hear. I hear something less than 50% of what you say when you speak in a Bible class. You're not trained speakers, you're uncomfortable with it, I understand that. But your comments are completely unknown to me. And I suspect, because I've talked to quite a few of you, by everybody who's wearing hearing aids. They just don't work as well as the human ear. And so, brethren, I'm sorry that I have these limitations, but it makes it very difficult for me, who, because of the nature of my presentations, really needs more surface area to work from than I could get down in the aisle like that. I've got to be rooted here to teach at all. And so what I'm saying is, if you love me, sit closer to me so I can tell how you're reacting to this class. Be like that young man right there. You see how he's leaning forward, rooted and riveted by every word? Be like that guy if you can. And I'll do the best I can with the circumstances as we find them. There's another reason why I do that, though. I'm going to be taking attendance from week to week. And as a matter of fact, I have to look now. I'm not even sure that I brought it. I hope I did. Here we go. And so it'll be a lot easier, too, and you won't have to get up and run to somebody if each week after you fill in this form, and we'll start with you, there's a pencil there, I will be taking attendance, because this also makes for a better class in my estimation. I'm a very demanding teacher. I appreciate that. But I've been at it for a while. And I found, brethren, that if I can know who is here and who was not, what the ramifications of a given holiday or just circumstances are, then it helps me to know how much to review, how much was lost by what number of people in the preceding class. So I take attendance. It helps me to do a better job for you. It also helps with the handouts. I think I ran short this morning. I did not anticipate there would be quite as many as we have. So I had 2 handouts. Raise your hand if you didn't get them. Okay, so we've got several. I'll be bringing more, and I'll know after we have all the fill out on the attendance sheet how many to do for the future. Now let's try to get into the class itself. I apologize. Most of the charts that you'll see come off the internet, and they're not always as plain as they could be. This one I think maybe doesn't show as well as I might have hoped. But these are the top 10 most cited books from the Old Testament in the New. The books that are most often directly quoted, "Thus saith the Lord," or are referenced, however obliquely, where you have allusions to these books. Please note that Genesis is the fourth largest book of the Old Testament to be quoted in the New. It is foundational. It is underlying so much of what takes place in the New Testament. And unfamiliarity with that book would have resulted in a crippling of Jesus' work, of the work of the apostles. So often, without explanation, laced through everything that they taught to bring us our salvation eternally, is rooted in the book of Revelation. And notice this, there's Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, if I can get it to turn here, it's supposed to be there somewhere, there it is, and Deuteronomy. Brethren, God felt that the first 5 books of the Bible were so critically important that they would be in the top 10. The things Moses wrote are most quoted throughout the New Testament. There are some, depending on how you count them, 854 quotations, references, or allusions to the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, to the Torah, the law, as the Jews referred to it, to Moses. Moses infuses the whole New Testament. He is its breath. He is its coursing blood. He is the heartbeat of our New Testaments. And so, on handouts and various other things that we'll be working with, I'm hoping in the course of these 13 weeks to try to immerse us in this book, to bring us a little bit closer then to a fuller understanding of the New Testament. Now, brethren, no doubt you have heard, it's extremely popular, everybody who has any concern about the Bible, I suppose, has heard this. The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. There's some truth in that. But please remember an enormous caveat. That is not exclusively true. It's not even very fully true. Because, brethren, it is at least equally true that the New Testament is revealed by the Old. Not understanding the Old has given us fits of problems with some of the thorniest issues that have ever confronted the church. Marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Eschatology, the study of last things. And a host of others. We often speak with great authority. This is what the New Testament means. And we've divorced it from the Old, not applying the Old Testament's lessons to the New, and we're missing the whole point frequently because we lack an understanding of that Old Testament. So most of you are going to have in your hands, I hope, the smaller of the 2 handouts. You'll see highlighted there Genesis and then the book of Luke. Genesis is the second largest book in the entire Bible. 66 books, Genesis, and close behind the book of Jeremiah. Note this as well. We saw it a moment ago that Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are also most quoted, as well as in the top 13 in the case of Leviticus, and 4 of Moses' works are in the top 10 of the biggest books in our Old Testament. So here at the beginning of this new year, we're starting the first book of the Bible, which is that book most centrally connected to the New Testament, many have argued, than any other. Think just about the size here as we go through these various books. Acts. Hold on a second, I got to get mine going up here so I can't see what I've got in the back. Acts, Matthew, John, Mark, Revelation, Romans, 1 Corinthians, Hebrews, 2 Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, 1 John, James, 1 Peter, Philippians, 1 Timothy, and Colossians have to be added together to equal the size of Moses' books. That's 18 out of the 27 books of the New Testament. And you're getting down to the 50th of the 66 books. That's mostly the rest of, on the list there, as you'll see on that right-hand column. Brethren, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are the foundation, firm, deep, secure, for the entirety of your New Testament. Now, you won't be able to see it on the screen, obviously, but hopefully the larger of the two handouts that I gave you, please note at the very top, whatever side you're looking at, find the one that says 68 New Testament references to Genesis, just the first 11 chapters, arranged by Genesis reference. Turn to the side that's the Genesis reference side. And then note, brethren, what I've done here. I got this from the net and then greatly remodeled it. But I wanted you to see this morning that what each face of that page represents is divided down the middle, 34 on one side, another 34 on the other side, arranged in such a manner that you can see the references in the New Testament to just the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Look, I want to go back on that one. See how many, outlined in red on the screen now, are all rooted in Genesis chapter 1. And then in the New Testament column, after the center column tells you a little bit, a paraphrase of what it's talking about, you can see the New Testament books and where that quotation or citation or reference or allusion can be found. Here are the second chapters. The second chapter of Genesis is references, to the New Testament. And then it's a lot less, really, as you go through chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, and 8. 9 and 10 aren't found of Genesis, are not found in the New Testament, not referenced in the New Testament. But brethren, just in the first 3 chapters, it's astonishing how it undergirds and supports and reveals so much of our New Testament. Now, if you'll turn the page over to the other side, I've taken this same data and I've arranged it into the different format by Genesis reference now so that you can pick out the blocks. Look at this one. How much of 1st and 2nd Corinthians is grounded in this book of Genesis? See how many from the, I've got to get over here myself. I can't see that at all. Hebrews. Look how extremely important that Genesis, just the first 11 chapters, are to an understanding of Hebrews. And then a Revelation. There's 11 references to Revelation in our Old Testament and vice versa. So, brethren, if I had to put a title on this class, when a trio of mean old elders say, we'd like for you in 13 weeks to teach the book it takes 3.5 hours to read, what are you going to do with it? So, brethren, after long thought, I've taught this book more than once in the past, I thought this time I would take a course that we'll call Genesis in the New Testament. So I will be focusing as much on the book of Genesis itself as I will in where it's referenced and how it's used and why it's so important to an understanding of the book that we're studying in the New Testament. Now, brethren, you can teach Genesis, as most people do, from a historical standpoint, and you read through all of it, and 3.5 hours out of your 11 or 12 are lost just in the reading of it. You can teach it from a morality standpoint. You can teach it from the standpoint of providence, how God provides for us. It is often taught, and extremely well, and quite importantly, from a defensive stature, so that you talk about textual criticism and how you can depend on this text and all other Bible texts. We have creation and evolution and the great debates and the propaganda that's being taught to our kids at school that we want to work through when we're dealing with Genesis. It's full of Christian evidences, demonstrations that there is a God, that the Bible is His Word, that we can then profit from studying that Word. Archaeology is something I'm fascinated by. I subscribe to the Biblical Archaeology Review, read that thing every month. And so all these things are important aspects, and I'm not hardly going to refer to any of them in this class. There's an enormous amount of material out there. I'm going to give you some resources here in just a minute. You can call or write me anytime, and of course I can recommend commentaries on the book, but we're not going to be focused nearly so much on that vast body of important information. I'm trusting, brethren, because in these 15 months, Dawn and I have commented on it quite a few times, this congregation has been highly blessed with unusually talented, knowledgeable teachers and preachers, and certainly its elders. And so there's just a higher level of understanding, and I'm going to lean heavily in this class on your familiarity with the book of Genesis. But I do have some helps for you as well. So my website is truthondisc.com. When you go to truthondisc.com, you'll see much more, but the top banner will look like that. So choose, in this case, Topical Studies. And under Topical Studies group on my website, the third one down there is Christian Evidences. How many of you know who Don Patton is? Don Patton. Oh my. Oh my. Don Patton is an astonishingly great defender of the book of Genesis and creation evidences in general. This is him working actually in excavating a Stegosaurus backbone at that point. But when you select that Christian Evidences and then Don Patton on my website, you'll get an explanation, which you can't read here, but you'll get in that upper left quadrant, an explanation of what the class is about. You'll then get a biography, which you'll have to click at the bottom to see all of it. And on the right-hand side, the list, in this case you can't even see all, of the classes that he taught. So start through that list if sometime in your life. I just think it's so foundational that I'm truly hoping that every one of you will make the opportunity. Spoke with Don about the lessons he wanted on the website. We communicated on all of that. This is the essence and the very best of what he has to offer. It's been updated in 2021, so very recent. Now, if you like, you can turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4. I'd like to start there for just a minute because in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4, in the Septuagint, which has been named after the 70 scholars who translated this book, and often is designated by the Roman numeral that you see there, 70. In the Septuagint, written, translated, Hebrew into Greek about 250 years before Christ, you have the Bible that Jesus and the apostles were using. We can see this in the original languages of the New Testament that they are referencing this work. So, the Jews of that day, who could read Hebrew, but also were fluent in the Greek of that time, were able to use both the Hebrew and their current common language translation of the Greek, which looks like this in Genesis 2 verse 4's beginning. Aute he biblos means this is the book. Geneseos. Geneseos it is, I'm sorry. Geneseos. And then that means of the generation or generations. Uranu kaiges, which means of heaven and earth. The word there that is translated of the generation is our English word Genesis, which has been lifted from the Greek's geneseos to become the title of the book. Frequently, and I hear this often, people think Genesis is the word that begins that book of Genesis, and it's translated in the beginning, and this is not so. It's very popular among us. It gets taught an awful lot, but it isn't so. The book was named after the Greek translation of the Hebrew from 250 BC from that word in the 4th verse of Genesis chapter 2. So now, let me see if I've got this right. There we go. Let me give you an assignment as we're drawing to the latter portion. We've got about a third of the class to go here. As we come down to really the meat of this class, let me ask you again to use my website, if you will. In the course of this week, at my website, when you go and select this time, Biblical Studies, then on a regular screen of a computer, it's wide enough, you're going to have the Old Testament column on the left, you can see it's truncated there, and then the New Testament on the right. But select Genesis. What I've posted there this last 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, is a reading by Alexander Scourby of the book of Genesis, which is considered unequaled, unparalleled, no contender for the best reading of the entire Bible, though I've got only Genesis on the website now for you, the best reading, interpretive reading of our Bible that's ever been done. And truly, if David's in the audience, I don't think he is, I don't see him yet, but I think as I try to compare, it would be better than Darth Vader. I'd have a hard time divorcing myself, I think, from Darth Vader if I had a reading of the Bible by him, though I'm sure he'd do a good job. But what I've done is I've posted that there with an explanation again, so that if you'll select this week, your assignment is just the first of his readings. So the first 5 chapters of the book of Genesis, you'll see this screen. So if you want, you can sit and look, and the pages will turn as you watch the video. You'll hear him reading from the King James Version. Brethren, it's awesome. I've listened to it for hours and hours and hours in the last 2 months as I was preparing for this class. I fell asleep to it last night, and I have very many nights wearing headphones and saturating myself in this man's interpretive reading of the book of Genesis. I think you'll love it. I think you'll learn from it. Now, for the last part of the class, and again I realize that's pretty difficult actually to look at, but that house right there is one of the most famous residences on planet Earth. In a single word, it's called Fallingwater. Fallingwater was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. How many of you know that name? Great. Way more than the last time I asked for show hands. Get to know Don Patton better than Frank Lloyd Wright. But Frank Lloyd Wright is arguably the greatest architect that has ever lived. You can take tours of this structure, and you can see it has a river that actually flows through this thing. So, brother, when you think about a house that's been designed by a master where people just marvel, what happened before that structure appeared? An immense amount of planning. You can go online, there must be hundreds of websites about this house. That man actually calculated the location of the sun on every day of the year for the property where they were going to build that, and designed the windows in the room to match so that the lighting would have certain effects as you pass through the entirety of the year. It is awesome what that man, made in the image of God, was able to do. But Genesis, brethren, is not the beginning. It is the beginning of something that has been very short-lived in the vastness of eternity. It is the beginning of the planet we walk about and upon. It's the beginning of the environment that we live in. But before that, there was the mind, the wisdom, the character, the being. I am. In infinite perfection without time. But what was he doing before he spoke that into existence? What, brethren, was God doing? In Ephesians, and pardon me again, I've got to catch up to myself on my screen. In Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3, and I will put all these up on the screen, but you may turn if you like. We'll be in the New Testament for just the next few minutes. In Ephesians chapter 1, and in verses 3 and 4, I would have you read actually all the way down through verse 21, where you will find a lengthy list throughout of the spiritual blessings that we have in Christ. All of them. And it's a lengthy list. But it begins like this. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places, just as He chose us in Him, long before there was time, so that we could reference what long is. In the infinity of I am, He chose you. He knew you personally before the foundation of the world, in verse 4. Before the world was, you were in the mind of God, both personally and collectively, in a corporate manner, if you want to use that term, as the church, the entirety, the fullness, the completion, the perfection of His entire plan, which was to result in your being here this morning on the first day of the week, to worship Him, to learn from Him. This He knew about you before the foundation of the earth. If we skip a little, because I just must for the sake of time. In Ephesians chapter 1, in verse 4 and in the latter part there as we pick up. So if you have your own Bibles, of course, please do scan through there. I had thought about going through all of it on screen and decided against it. But brethren, as this continues, you're going to see time and again that these spiritual blessings were a part of God's thinking, a part of His planning, and therefore would be embedded into His creation, so that, hopefully, for all of the time that the earth would spin under the sun, people would know the name of Yahweh, God. Simon and Garfunkel, how many of you know them? Not so many. Their best album, by the way, is called Bridge Over Troubled Water, and I'll bet you know that song, Bridge Over Troubled Water. One of the songs on that album was written in tribute to Frank Lloyd Wright. So long, Frank Lloyd Wright. He had died. Frank's gone, and God knows what He did with Genesis. I have no idea. But God also knows what you have done, what you are doing, what you will be doing with Genesis, His generating of an earth. And I forgot to point that out earlier. The word actually means generations. It might be translated history. So yes, it's about the beginning, but it's about an awful lot of years and centuries of, our Bibles are in toto, of humankind's history. The book of Genesis is about the generation of the earth and all that's on it, the history that's transpired since then. But brethren, it was all that we would be holy and blameless before Him. Frank Lloyd Wright, there's others, is the epitome of planning a structure. And God is the fullness of you who were made in His image. We're going to talk about that next week. You bear that image. He is within you. You are of Him. You are like Him. And you will not take your next breath unless He permits and Christ allows. This is what needs to be remembered. This is what needs to be studied. The architects of the world gather at the feet of Frank Lloyd Wright. How we should come trembling, and yet Hebrew tells us boldly before the throne of God who made all things in the material universe. Brethren, because what He expected from that creation is holiness, is blamelessness, is the recognition that you may never escape Him, Psalm 139. That you are always in His presence. What you are, He understands, is aware, and anticipates that before Him, in His presence, we would be the set-apart people who no one could point their accusing finger at and say, you sinned. You're wrong. What He expects out of us, achievable, or He would not ask it, proven achievable in the life of Jesus the Christ, is that we be holy and blameless before Him. I had the great privilege, and I think it was about a month ago, maybe more, for Clay Gentry to contact me and say, Larry, would you meet me at the building? Sure, so we made an appointment on a Tuesday, went down into the office downstairs. Little did I know that I would not emerge until 4 hours later. Because he was planning for an entire year to be teaching in a classroom he is right now, and in other assemblies here for us, God's scheme of redemption. God's plan of salvation. The working of what He had intended before the foundation of the world. How we are to be holy and blameless, no excuse for sin, but a plan, brethren, that can redeem us, that can save us, that can rescue us when in fact we do sin, that planned for that also. Before the foundation of the world, God knew that you would sully His image, that I and all, save the Christ, would sin, would corrupt and defile the flesh we inhabit, the mind that directs that body. And yet, God, who is love throughout eternity, loved us and sent His only begotten Son. Brethren, in Genesis, He gave us the book above all others that lays the foundation for the building that is the temple of Jesus the Christ and our God, the architects and builders of salvation, of redemption, of atonement, of propitiation. All words we'll be studying, I learned from Clay, in the course of this year. Our elders, in a magnificent fit of wisdom, have conceived themselves, and we are now implementing an amazing year full of this infinite and foreknown plan. That we should be holy and blameless before Him, in love, brethren, because that is what He is. By predestining us, which very soon Clay is going to be talking about, today even, if you read the bulletin, to adoption as sons, children, through Jesus Christ to Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will. By predestining us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ to Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will, to the praise of the glory of His grace, our mission, which we chose, our work, our responsibility. That people look at us and praise the glory of God's grace, which He, did it again, graciously bestowed upon us in the beloved. A little later in verse 18, in the midst of where Paul is telling us of the things he does not cease praying about, he prays that the Ephesians and us to this day, it's meant for us, written down, the eyes of your heart, having been enlightened, will know what is the hope of His calling, what are the riches of the glory of His inheritance in the saints. Have you any idea how valuable you are to Him? That you are described as the riches of the glory of the saints, which He inherits. The inheritance in the saints, not something we're going to get. It's when we come to Him and He gets us back. 1 Peter 1 verses 20 and 21 say, He was foreknown, Jesus was, before the foundation of the world, but appeared in these last times. They were living in the last times. We've got a lot of work to do when we're talking about last times, brethren. We just so often miss the point. They were living in the last times for this context's sake, for the sake of you, who through Him are believers in God, who raised Him from the dead and gave Him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God, known before the foundation of the world. This man, delivered over by the predestined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross as surely as they did, by your sins, by the hands of lawless men, and put Him to death. And brethren, in all these statements, it's about what God foreknew. Then the King will say to those on His right, Come, you are blessed of my Father. Inherit the kingdom. It is this kingdom, born in Genesis, that we'll be studying. Genesis in the New Testament. Thank you all.